a period of sectionalism. Okay, and you'll hear it called, the sectional crisis. Make sure you say that word correctly, otherwise you might get the wrong idea. Crisis of the Union, whatever it is, okay, to refer to this time period. And that's the time period from about the end of the Mexican-American War to the outbreak of the Civil War, okay? So what the heck's going on in America? Well, lots of things. You guys remember when we talked about the Proclamation of 1763 a couple years ago, right? And in ninth grade, we talked about the cookies and all that stuff, right? Yeah. You guys remember that? Yeah. And the idea that you can't go over there, okay? A lot of that comes into play here in the Mexican-American War and afterwards when we get all that land. All right, so when you're looking at consequences of it, okay, what's the impact of that war? Well, we got a whole lot of new land, okay, from Mexico all the way to California. It's new. So we end up striking a deal with Britain to get the Oregon country, and now we basically have the entirety of the North American continent, where our borders are basically set from sea to sea, okay? And again, what happens is you see this thing come up, right? So we have that issue of slavery again. The Missouri Compromise, which was written by Henry Clay along with the Compromise of 1850, the Missouri Compromise said you can't have slavery north of that line, 36 degrees, 30 minutes, right, in Missouri. This takes the Missouri Compromise and basically throws it out the window because you have land that's split and you have people settling in areas that their borders are already coming into shape. So, free slave, you're going to make two states. And again, if you take away just this plain issue of slavery, it's more about what? How many seats you have in Congress, right? Having some power. Cool.
What is
divisive?
Yeah.
Divisive means like controversial. It's a good dividing issue, right?
Oh.
Okay. So yeah, we get more land, but it also causes some more problems. Okay. So 1846, member of Congress puts out the Wilmot Proviso. And what that says, basically, is that any land we get from Mexico is going to be free, including Texas, which had slaves or not? Did, right? It went against Mexican law, had slaves. So this piece of legislation would say anything we get, including Texas, is going to be slave-free. Who's not going to like that?
The South.
The South, right? Mainly, well, yeah, they're not going to like it either, right? Slave owners aren't going to be big fans. Maybe, I don't think slavery is really a wealthy man's game. The idea is if all those states are not permitted to have slaves, what's going to happen to the balance of power in Congress? Whose favor is it going to swing?
North.
The North's, right? So if all those states are free states, then the North's going to end up having more power, right? So, how did they oppose that? Well, my property. I can do what I want with it. Okay? So if I want to move into new territories and I have a slave or slaves, I should be able to do whatever I want. They argue there's no difference that from owning a slave as to owning a horse or an ox. Same thing. I think we'd look at it now as probably a pretty callous attitude, but legally, that's their argument, and legally, at the time, they make it well, okay? So, with all that being said, you create deeper divisions. you have people in the North now starting to turn a little bit in terms of the morality of slavery, but not very much. Many in the North really don't care if they're slaves or not. Factory owners, business people do. I mean, they're getting things pretty darn cheap. Your divisions come politically, and they start to come around border states. Okay? Discussing the issue of slavery, discussing, more of the role of government around this issue. Okay? People start to debate the definition of America. Is America a place where the government can tell somebody what they can and cannot own? Is America a place where the government does nothing if one human owns another human? I mean, do you see kind of the bigger issues at play? And what's the government's role? Is it the federal government's role to take those away, or should that be the states? Should the state decide? Should the individual decide? You remember we talked about that a couple days ago? Who's making those decisions? And people in the South are saying, let me make my decision. And you have policymakers in the North saying, that's a federal deal. Okay? So, how do they settle this? With a single term. Written very poorly. Popular sovereignty. You see this play out in territories of Kansas and Nebraska, which we'll talk about later. But the suggestion comes in, you know what? Let's let the people decide. Let's let the people vote. Very democratic. So if you get more people in a state that want slavery and they go out and vote, the state's going to be what? A slave state, right? If more people want it to be free that live in that state and they go out and vote, it's going to be a free state. Make sense? Okay? What's the problem with that? In theory, great idea, right? But what's a potential problem? What? People voting more than once, right? Going from town to town, maybe, because it's not such an you don't have an organized government yet, right? Excellent, good, Bobby, good. What else? Zach, what'd you say? Yeah, but you can still agree or disagree with it philosophically, right? So you're still letting your voice be heard. Bobby had a good point there. Jonah, another problem.
After one is a 3-year slave state, and still have more power.
So you're not doing anything to ensure that balance. So at the end of the day, you're going to upset somebody.
Yeah.
Okay. What else? Good, guys. What's that? They still have to go there. So what problems could that present? Maybe you're not going to have people come.
Go there, but they just don't want to go as far.
Okay, good, good. What about people coming from other areas saying that they live there? Possibility? I would think, especially if you're on one of those borders, right? I mean, like Bobby said, you don't want people to vote twice. Well, if you go round up a lot of slave supporters in Missouri and import them to Nebraska on election day, okay, how are you going to prove that they're not from there? And everybody has a driver's license because they didn't issue driver's licenses, right? It's the same thing on the other side. So the integrity of the vote, and Bobby, you're getting at that, is what is at issue there, right? Okay, now we jump ahead to 1848. I've got a new, download a new kind of slide thing, so the titles are in different spots. I kind of like it. Anyway, war's over with Mexico. We get to California, and what do they find?
Gold.
Eureka! Gold! Yes! Yeah! How many guys have seen Toy Story 2? With Stinky Pete, the best darn prospector in the whole Wild West, right? What's Stinky Pete digging for? Gold! Thank you for answering that correctly. That's good. So, you got all these people out there in California. You have a population explosion. Okay? Now, holy cow, that's great. There's not a lot of gold, but you got a lot of people, so you have a lot of lawlessness. There's not a government set up. There's not a police set up. So this idea, the idea of the Wild West, kind of comes in part from this. So you have just a ton of people moving in one area, and then who's keeping control? No one. Whoever wants to, I guess. Okay. So California now, in a very short period of time, is a state. 1849, California becomes a state. They want to enter as a free state. Okay? Why the heck is the football team in San Francisco called the 49ers?
49ers.
The gold rush, right? Why are their colors red and gold? Gold rush, right? Shoot, they could probably have Stinky Pete. If you look at their mascot, he does kind of look like Stinky Pete. Okay? So, it's 1849 now. Okay, gold's discovered in 48. People rushed there in 49. We're sitting at even now, 15 free, 15 slave. Right? Texas before this came in as a slave state, right? California now comes in as a free state. Make sense? Good?
No.
No?
Yeah.
Okay. Guys, they'll be up online here too, so I'm going to skip ahead. Now, here comes Henry Clay, the bane of everybody who's trying to answer number 3 on your homework. Okay? Henry Clay, who put together the Missouri Compromise, which limited the expansion of slavery, but preserved it in the state of Missouri, brought Maine in as a free state, wants to solve this problem and basically avoid war. So he puts forth a couple different ideas. Old Hank also ran for president a lot, never won. Thought he should have a couple times, but I'll have to check. But I think he ran 4 or 5 times for president and lost every time.
I'm sure this is pretty
Good. Okay, well, Mittens has only run once before. But, yeah.
Who did he run against the first time?
It could be if Mittens loses. What's that?
Who was he against the first time?
Who, Mittens? John McCain. Okay. And he lost in the primary. Okay. So Henry Clay gets this nickname, the Great Compromiser. Not the biggest loser because he can't win a presidential race, but he's the Great Compromiser. Okay. So what the heck does he do? Guys, this is a great compromise you're talking about in your homework. It's a compromise 1850. Okay? Yep. It's all part of it. End this the other day, but it's pretty even. Come on. Okay. So what is this? How does this work? There's 5 parts. Okay? It almost kind of sounds like Mitt, where there's 5-point plans. The president had a couple 5-point plans. Maybe that's the thing. Maybe they got it from Henry Clay, both of those two. California comes in as a free state. Okay? New Mexico and Utah will vote on if they want to be free or slave, regardless of geographic location. Texas is going to be split into Texas and New Mexico. So now you got another state that's going to decide. The U.S. is going to pay Texas $10 million for New Mexico. Okay? 4, there's no more slave trade in the nation's capital, which was a big one. The nation's capital is Washington, D.C. is in the south. Okay? And the last point is they passed the Fugitive Slave Act, which was a pretty darn horrific piece of legislation. So, win one for the North and the South. North. Win one for the North or the South? Well, I'd say probably both, right? Because the possibility is there that they could both be free or slave. So yet to be determined. North or South?
South. Well, both.
Kind of both, right? Because now you have the ability to have another free state, right? So the North kind of wins, but that state then, because of this, could vote to go slave or free. Okay, North or South? No more slave trade. North. Fugitive Slave Act. North or South?
So
South. Okay,
that's a big south.
that's a big one, right? This is important, but it's also symbolic.
So technically, the North.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you don't know how it's going to play out. So you could have either in New Mexico or Utah a multitude of slave supporters or slave opposers move there and vote the state to be a slave state, right? Or a free state. So if that happens and they come in as slave states, now there's nothing anybody can do. You got two more slave states. So you're losing that swing, that balance of power, right? This one is the one that is the biggie.
So if
What's that, Zach?
I was gonna say, holy cow. I was gonna say, so if they did become slave, who would win it then, North or South?
So they'd have more states. We need to take a closer look at the Fugitive Slave Act. Okay?
What that bottom part say?
Which one, Brady?
Amendment 5.
Fugitive Slave Act passed. Here, I'll even. There. You can see that a little better. Okay? We'll take a closer look at that. Looking at the positives and negatives. Okay? Basically, what it did is it calmed everybody down for about 10 years. So you hold off, basically stave off war for 10 years. It also allowed the North and South to kind of step back and take a breath, right? These two things really play into each other, right? I mean, they're similar, one and the same. It's a little off. Wow. Close. So, well, basically, Brady, what I'm saying is these two things are the same, right? So people calm down, and then they didn't go to war, right? Rut roll. Rut roll. Because of the popular sovereignty clause, you're not having any more compromise. Right? Not at all. Whoever's doing that, stop and excuse yourself. It's disgusting.
That one was big. Excuse me, that.
Okay. You're not having compromise because you can't legislate what people are going to vote. Okay? You already told them they can decide. If they decide, okay, that's what it is. You can't change that. Right? You can't say, okay, you'll be free, you'll be slave, you'll be whatever, da da da. So now the battlegrounds are going to be on what states? The new one, right? Right away, Utah, New Mexico, and then whatever new ones come in. Make sense? Okay. It also doesn't do anything to change that conflict. Calms people down. But everything's still there. All right, last one now. The Fugitive Slave Act is the biggest deal. It's the most objectionable part to anybody in the North. Okay? So, what does it say? Well, yeah, you read it, they don't testify, but basically what the Fugitive Slave Act does is if you're a black person in the North, you can be accused of being a slave or runaway, and you have to be turned in. You have no right to defend yourself, and you must be returned to your master.
We didn't have a master.
Well, then they check records. People put out, I've lost this many slaves, this is what they look like. It also made it a crime to harbor or aid any slave whatsoever.
Even if you're using them as slaves?
Well, this is in the north. If you're using them as slaves, no, it's this in the north. So Colton, let's say that you live in Boston and you have 3, 4 friends, real good friends that are black. Okay? Maybe they're all free. They could be rounded up, accused of being slaves, shipped down to the south because they can't defend themselves, and then you're convicted of a felony because you were helping.
Oh.
So I mean, that's going to have a pretty large impact on society, right? If you're in the north, you're going to hire anybody who might be a former slave? No. All right, we'll pick up there on Monday. See